I met my half-sister at our father's will reading. She got nothing, then asked for one day. Opening. I'm writing this from my father's porch, watching the wedding cleanup crew pack away the chairs. My half-sister is inside, laughing with her new husband. 6 months ago, I didn't even know she existed. 3 months ago, I wanted her out of my life forever. And now I'm not sure what we are, but it's something. The caterers are loading the last of the chafing dishes into their van. The florist already left an hour ago, taking the centerpieces that will probably end up at a nursing home somewhere. The string quartet packed up their instruments just after sunset, and now the only music is the sound of crickets and the occasional burst of laughter from inside the house. My house. Our father's house. The house that started all of this. I'm an architect by trade, 33 years old, and I've spent the last decade of my life designing spaces for other people to live in. I understand how walls can divide or connect. How a doorway can be an invitation or a barrier. How the same four walls can feel like a sanctuary or a prison depending on who's standing inside them. But I never understood any of that as deeply as I do right now. Let me go back to the beginning. Or rather, let me go back to the end of something, because that's where this story really starts. Update 1. The phone call that changed everything. 6 months ago, I got a phone call at 2:47 a.m. I remember the exact time because I was working late on a project, a community center design for a small town in Vermont, and I just glanced at the clock when my phone rang. My father's name on the screen. We weren't close. We hadn't been close since I was 14 years old and discovered that his business trips weren't business trips at all. My mother had confronted him. He'd chosen to stay with her, technically, but something in our family fractured that year and never quite healed. But I answered anyway. That's what you do when your father calls at 2:47 a.m. Except it wasn't my father. It was a nurse at a hospital 3 states away, and she was calling to tell me that he'd had a massive heart attack. He'd listed me as his emergency contact. She was very sorry. They'd done everything they could. I sat in my home office, phone pressed to my ear, and felt absolutely nothing. That numbness lasted through the funeral arrangements, through the service itself, and through the reception afterward. My mother came, which surprised me. She stood in the back of the church with her arms crossed, her face unreadable, and left before anyone could offer condolences. I don't blame her. She'd spent 20 years married to a man who'd been unfaithful for at least half of them, and she'd spent the 15 years since their divorce trying to rebuild her life. She didn't owe him her grief. The numbness lasted until the will reading. That's when I learned about my half-sister. My father's lawyer was a soft-spoken man in his 60s with the kind of gentle demeanor that suggested he'd delivered a lot of bad news in his career. He read through the preliminary details, outstanding debts to be settled, a modest investment portfolio, a vintage car my father had restored himself, and then he got to the real estate. The property at 147 Lakeview Drive, he said, valued at approximately $1.2 million, including the residence, the surrounding 4 acres, and all contents therein, is bequeathed in its entirety to. He said my name. I nodded. I'd expected that. The lake house was the only thing my father truly loved, the only thing he'd maintained with consistent devotion throughout his life. He'd bought it before I was born, renovated it himself over the decades, and spent every spare moment there. When my parents divorced, my mother had wanted nothing to do with it. She said it was haunted by too many lies. However, the lawyer continued, and his voice shifted slightly, taking on that careful tone people use when they're about to deliver the bad news, I should inform you that there is another party who was not included in the will, but who has been made aware of its contents. He looked toward the door. I turned. And there she was. She was 26 years old, though I didn't know that yet. She had our father's eyes, that particular shade of gray-blue that I'd inherited too, and she was standing in the doorway of the lawyer's office like she was afraid to come any closer. Like she was afraid of me. "This is your half-sister," the lawyer said. "Your father's daughter from another relationship. She was born when you were 7 years old. She's here because—" He paused, clearly uncomfortable. "Because she wanted to be present for the reading. She hoped there might be something left to her. There wasn't. My father had left his other daughter absolutely nothing." Update 2. The confrontation. The next few minutes are a blur in my memory, but I remember her face when the lawyer confirmed what she'd already suspected. She'd known. Somehow, she'd known that our father had written her out completely, and she'd come anyway. She'd driven 4 hours to sit in a lawyer's office and hear, officially, that the man who'd abandoned her as a child had abandoned her one final time in death. I kept asking myself, was I angry at her, or at our father? She didn't choose to be born any more than I did. But in that moment, I was angry at everyone. "How long?" I asked her. My voice came out harsher than I intended. How long did you know about me? She flinched. Since I was 16. My mother told me. She thought I deserved to know I had a brother. And you never reached out. He asked me not to. Her voice was steady, but I could see her hands trembling. Our father. He said it would hurt your family. He said your mother couldn't handle knowing about me, about my mother. He said. She stopped. Swallowed. He said he'd make it up to me someday. He promised. The lawyer excused himself, muttering something about giving us privacy. The door clicked shut behind him. We stood there, two strangers with the same gray-blue eyes, in a room that smelled like old leather and broken promises. I'm not here to contest the will, she said finally. I know I don't have a legal claim. She took a breath. I just wanted to meet you. I've wanted to meet you my whole life. And I wanted to see if maybe there was something of him that could be mine too. Not the money. Not the house. Just something. I should have been kinder. I know that now. But I just buried a father I'd barely known, inherited a house full of memories I wasn't sure I wanted, and discovered that my entire childhood had been built on a foundation of lies. So instead of being kind, I said, "You're a stranger who showed up at a will reading hoping for scraps from a man who clearly didn't think you deserved anything. I don't know what you expected, but I can't give it to you." She left without another word. I drove to the lake house that night, alone. I stood on the porch, this porch where I'm sitting now, and I looked out at the water, and I tried to figure out what kind of man my father had really been. I didn't like the answer. Update 3, the pressure begins. 2 weeks later, she reached out again. She'd found my work email somehow, probably from my firm's website, and she sent me a message that was so carefully worded, so obviously revised a dozen times before sending, that I could feel her anxiety through the screen. She wasn't asking for money. She wasn't contesting the will. She had just one request. I'm getting married in 4 months, she wrote. I've been engaged for a year, and we've been looking at venues, but nothing feels right. The only place that ever felt like home to me was that lake house. Dad used to take me there when I was little, before he stopped coming around. He taught me to fish on that dock. He told me stories about my grandfather building the original cabin. I know it's your house now, and I know I have no right to ask, but could I please have my wedding there? Just one day. It's all I'm asking. Part of me wanted to say yes immediately. Another part wanted to burn the house down rather than share anything connected to him. I didn't respond. But other people did. My mother found out. I still don't know how. Maybe she'd kept in touch with someone from my father's circle, and she called me in a fury I hadn't heard since the divorce. "You're not actually considering this," she said. It wasn't a question. I haven't decided anything. She's the product of an affair. Her mother was the other woman. 4 years. Do you understand what that means? Do you understand what I went through? I did understand. I'd watched my mother shrink during those years, watched her light dim as she tried to hold together a family that was crumbling from the inside. I'd watched her rebuild herself after the divorce, brick by painful brick, into someone stronger. But I'd also watched her become harder, more brittle, less able to see nuance in anything. She didn't have an affair, I said quietly. Her mother did. Our father did. She was a child. She's a reminder of everything he did to us. And now you want to throw her a party in his house? That's a betrayal, and you know it. My mother called it a betrayal. Maybe she was right. But something about this felt different. Something about this felt like the first honest thing I'd been asked to do since my father died. On the other side, the pressure came from my half-sister's family. Her mother, the other woman, reached out to me directly, which took a certain kind of audacity I almost admired. She sent a letter, handwritten, explaining that my father had promised to provide for her daughter, that he'd always said he'd make things right, and that the least I could do was honor his wishes. I threw the letter away. But I couldn't throw away the conflict inside myself. Update 4. The mediator. My uncle stepped in 3 weeks after the will reading. He was my father's younger brother, and he was the only person in our family who seemed capable of holding 2 truths at the same time. He'd loved my father despite knowing about the affairs. He'd supported my mother during the divorce while still maintaining a relationship with my father's other family. He existed in the gray space that the rest of us were too angry to occupy. He drove up to the lake house on a Saturday morning, found me staring at the water, and sat down beside me without saying anything for a long time. Finally, he spoke. "Your father was a coward." I looked at him, startled. I'd expected him to defend my father, or at least to explain him. He loved your mother in his way, my uncle continued. And he loved that other woman too, also in his way. But he was too afraid to choose, too afraid to be honest, too afraid to face the consequences of his own decisions. So he just compartmentalized. He kept two families in separate boxes, told himself that as long as the boxes never touched, no one would get hurt. He shook his head. That's not love. That's cowardice. Then why should I do anything for her? I asked. Why should I give his other daughter anything when he clearly didn't think she deserved it? Because you're not him. My uncle turned to look at me directly. The question isn't what your father would have done. The question is what kind of man you want to be. Do you want to inherit his cowardice along with his house? Or do you want to be someone better? I didn't have an answer. But my uncle arranged a meeting anyway. We met at a diner halfway between the lake house and my half-sister's apartment, neutral ground. She brought her fiancé, a quiet man with kind eyes who watched her the way people watch something precious and fragile. I came alone. For the first hour, we talked about nothing. The weather. Local restaurants. Safe, meaningless topics that filled the silence without addressing the elephant in the room. Then she said, I don't want to fight with you. I know you don't owe me anything. But can you at least understand why I asked? And somehow, sitting in that vinyl booth with a cup of cold coffee between my hands, I finally did understand. She told me about her childhood. About waiting for our father to show up for her birthday parties, only to get a phone call at the last minute saying he couldn't make it. About watching her friends' fathers attend their school plays while she scanned the audience and found only her mother's face. About the summer she turned 12, when our father took her to the lake house for a whole week and she thought, finally he was choosing her. And then he'd gotten a phone call from my mother, and he'd driven her home a day early, and he'd never taken her back. I spent my whole life trying to earn his attention, she said. And I never got it. He was always running back to his real family. But that lake house, for 1 week, I was his daughter there. Not his secret. Not his mistake. His daughter. Her fiancé reached over and took her hand. I know he didn't leave me anything in the will, she continued. And I understand why you're angry. But I'm not asking you to share your inheritance. I'm asking you to let me have one day, one single day, in a place where I once felt like I belonged to someone. I thought about all the times I'd resented my father. All the times I'd wished he were more present, more engaged, more honest. And I realized that at least I'd had him in my daily life. At least I'd had birthday parties where he actually showed up, most of the time. At least I'd had school plays where his face was in the audience, even if his mind was elsewhere. She'd had almost nothing. And now she had literally nothing. I wasn't punishing her. I was punishing a ghost. And ghosts can't feel pain, only the living can. Update 5. The compromise. We negotiated the terms over the following week. The wedding would happen at the lake house, but under specific conditions. She and her fiancé would handle all the logistics, the caterers, the florist, the rental company for chairs and tables. They would pay for everything, and they would ensure that nothing in the house was damaged or altered. I would be present for the entire event, not as a guest exactly, but as, I wasn't sure what, a guardian, a witness, a half-brother who wasn't quite family but wasn't quite a stranger anymore. She agreed to everything immediately. There's one more thing, I said during our final planning meeting. I want to understand why you're marrying him. She blinked, caught off guard. Excuse me. Our father was a man who couldn't commit to anything except his own comfort. He juggled two families, made promises he never kept, and died leaving a trail of broken relationships behind him. I need to know that you're not repeating his patterns. I need to know that you actually love this man, and that you're not just performing something because you think it's what you're supposed to do. It was a rude question. An invasive question. But I asked it anyway, because I was starting to care about the answer. Her fiancé spoke before she could. I know about her father, he said. I know what she went through. And I've spent 3 years showing her what commitment actually looks like. I'm not him. I won't be him. She's the only family I want, and I'll spend my life proving that. Something in my chest loosened. Not all the way, there was still too much confusion, too much residual anger, but enough. Okay, I said. Let's do this. My mother didn't speak to me for 2 weeks after I told her about the decision. She finally broke her silence with a text message that simply said, I hope you know what you're doing. I didn't. But I was doing it anyway. The wedding. The day itself was everything I expected and nothing I expected at the same time. I woke up at dawn, unable to sleep, and walked the property as the caterers began arriving. The lake was glass-smooth and silver in the early light. A family of ducks paddled past the dock, oblivious to the chaos unfolding on shore. I stood there watching them and thought about all the times my father must have stood in this exact spot, looking at this exact view, carrying secrets I'd never even suspected. The chairs went up on the lawn, overlooking the water. White chairs, simple and elegant, arranged in neat rows with an aisle down the center. A wooden arch at the front, draped in greenery and white flowers. It looked like a wedding from a magazine, and it felt absolutely surreal. My half-sister arrived at noon to get ready in the guest room. I heard her upstairs, moving around, and I thought about the fact that she'd never been inside this house as an adult. The last time she'd walked these halls, she'd been 12 years old, still believing that our father would eventually choose her. He never had. But she was here now. And for today, at least, she belonged. The ceremony began at 4 o'clock. 50 guests, mostly her side, friends, extended family, colleagues. I stood at the back, feeling like an intruder at my own property, watching as she walked down the aisle in a simple white dress that our father would never see her wear. The officiant talked about love and commitment and the courage it takes to build a life with another person. He talked about family, about the people we're born to and the people we choose, about how sometimes those circles overlap and sometimes they don't. And then my half-sister said her vows. She talked about her fiancé, about the life they were building together. But she also talked about the house. About standing in a place that held so many painful memories and choosing to fill it with something new. About refusing to let the past define her future. I spent my whole life wanting to be enough for someone who couldn't see me, she said, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. And then I found someone who sees nothing but me. Today, I'm standing in a place where I once felt invisible, surrounded by people who see me. And I'm choosing to believe that's not an accident. I'm choosing to believe that even broken things can be redeemed. I'm not ashamed to admit I cried. The aftermath. The reception lasted until almost midnight. There was dancing on the lawn, and toasts, and the kind of laughter that comes from genuine joy rather than obligation. I stayed on the periphery for most of it, nursing a single glass of champagne and watching the people my half-sister had gathered around her. She found me eventually. She walked across the grass in her bare feet. She'd kicked off her heels hours ago, and sat down beside me on the porch steps. "Thank you," she said. "I know this wasn't easy for you." "It wasn't," I agreed. "But I'm glad I did it." We sat in silence for a while, watching the fairy lights twinkle above the dance floor. "I keep thinking about him," she said finally. "Our father. I keep thinking about what he'd say if he could see this. If he'd be happy, or angry, or—" "I think he'd be confused," I said. "I think he spent his whole life trying to keep us apart, and he wouldn't understand why we chose to come together." "Do you hate him?" I considered the question seriously. "No. But I don't forgive him either. I think I'm just done with him. He made his choices. He's dead now, and we're the ones who have to live with the consequences." "That's very philosophical." "I'm an architect. We're trained to think about foundations." She laughed. It was a small sound, barely more than a breath, but it was real. "What happens now?" she asked. "With us, I mean. Are we? I don't know. Siblings? Strangers? Something in between?" I thought about it. "I don't know what we are. But I think I'd like to find out." Resolution. I'm writing this from my father's porch, watching the wedding cleanup crew pack away the chairs. My half-sister is inside, laughing with her new husband. 6 months ago, I didn't even know she existed. 3 months ago, I wanted her out of my life forever. And now I'm not sure what we are, but it's something. The caterers have finished loading their vans. The florist's truck pulled away 20 minutes ago. The chairs are stacked and ready for pickup in the morning. By this time tomorrow, the lawn will look like nothing ever happened here. But something did happen here. Something that felt, for the first time since my father's death, like the right thing. My mother still isn't speaking to me. I understand why, and I'm giving her space. Maybe she'll come around eventually. Maybe she won't. Either way, I made my choice, and I stand by it. My half-sister and her husband are leaving in the morning, heading off on their honeymoon to somewhere warm. She hugged me before going inside, and it was awkward and stiff and nothing like how siblings are supposed to hug. But it was real. "Can I come back?" she asked, pulling away. "Not to stay. Just to visit. To see the water. To remember." "Yeah," I said. "You can come back." I don't know what family means anymore. I thought I understood it. Mother, father, child, the nuclear unit that defines so much of how we see the world. But my father blew up that definition a long time ago, and I'm only now starting to rebuild it. Maybe family isn't about blood. Maybe it isn't about wills and inheritances and who gets the house. Maybe it's about the choices we make, day after day, to show up for each other even when it's hard. Even when it hurts. Even when it would be easier to build walls instead of bridges. I'm an architect. I know how to build things. I know how to lay foundations and raise walls and create spaces where people can live their lives. But I'm only just learning how to build something that matters. Something that lasts. Something that can't be inherited or willed or divided up by lawyers. Something like connection. My half-sister steps out onto the porch, her husband's arm around her waist. She's still in her wedding dress, but she's taken down her hair, and she looks younger than she did this morning. Younger and lighter, like something heavy has finally been set down. "We're heading to bed," she says. "Thank you again. For everything." "You're welcome." She hesitates. "You know, he talked about you sometimes. Our father. He'd tell me stories about teaching you to fish, about watching you grow up. I used to be so jealous. I thought you had everything I wanted. And now." She shrugs. "Now I think we both just had different halves of a man who didn't know how to be whole." She goes inside. The screen door swings shut behind her. I sit on the porch for a long time after that, watching the stars come out over the lake. The water is dark and still. Somewhere out there, a fish breaks the surface, leaving ripples that spread and eventually disappear. Our father is gone. His secrets are buried with him. But we're still here, two strangers with the same gray-blue eyes, trying to figure out what we owe each other. I don't have answers yet. But I have a house with room enough for more than one person's memories. I have a half-sister who asked for one day and got it. I have a foundation that might, with enough time and care, hold something new. It's not much. But it's a start. And for the first time in months, that feels like enough. Edit. Thank you all for the responses. To answer some common questions. No, I don't regret the decision. Yes, my mother and I are still working through things. And yes, my half-sister and I are tentatively planning to have dinner when she gets back from her honeymoon. I'll update if anything significant changes. For now, I'm going to sit here a little longer, watching the water, thinking about the man who built this house and the mess he left behind. And then I'm going to start building something better. Here's what I learned from letting a stranger have her wedding at my father's house. You can't punish ghosts. You can only punish the living. For weeks after that while reading, I thought I was protecting something. My inheritance. My mother's feelings. My right to be angry at a man who'd lied to everyone he claimed to love. But I wasn't protecting anything. I was just holding on to pain because I didn't know what else to do with it. My half-sister didn't choose to be born into a secret. She didn't choose a father who visited her like she was a side quest in his real life. She spent her whole childhood waiting for a man who was always driving back to us, to the family he decided was his real one. And then he died and left her literally nothing. Not money. Not property. Not even an acknowledgement that she existed. I could have added to that pain. I almost did. My uncle said something that stuck with me. The question isn't what your father would have done. The question is what kind of man you want to be. And he was right. I'd spent so long being angry at my father that I almost became him. Someone who compartmentalizes people, who decides who deserves connection and who doesn't, who builds walls instead of bridges. My mother still thinks I betrayed her. Maybe I did. But I think there are some betrayals that are actually just growing. Becoming someone different than the person your pain wanted you to be. I don't know what my half-sister and I are to each other. We're not family, not really, you can't build that in a few months. But we're not strangers anymore either. We're something in between. Two people with the same gray-blue eyes, trying to figure out what we owe each other, if anything. She asked if she could come back to visit. I said yes. Not because I've forgiven our father. I haven't, and I'm not sure I ever will. But because she's not him. She's just someone who got hurt by the same man I did, in different ways. One more thing I've realized, inheritance isn't just about property. It's about patterns. My father inherited his father's inability to commit, and he passed that down through decades of broken promises. I inherited his house. But I get to choose whether I inherit his cowardice too. I'm choosing not to. The house is still mine. The memories are still complicated. But now there's a new memory there too. A wedding, a sister I'm just starting to know, a day when I chose connection over resentment. It's not much. But it's a foundation. And I know how to build on foundations.